in this beautiful setting. My name is Congressman Adam Schiff, and we're here to announce that when Congress returns this Veterans Day recess, after the recess, I'll be introducing a bill called the Orca Responsibility and Care Advancement, or Orca Act, to phase out the captivity of orcas across the United States. Decades of experience and scientific study have demonstrated that orcas are uniquely unsuited for life in captivity. Orcas are too socially complex, too intelligent, too long-lived, and simply too big to thrive in confinement. In the wild, orcas can swim 100 miles in a day and routinely dive to 300 feet. In captivity, they are held in comparatively tiny, shallow concrete tanks, only 1/10,000th of 1% of the size of their natural home ranges. In the wild, orcas are highly social and live in matrilineal pods that can be as large as 40 individuals. Wild orca calves are dependent on their mothers nutritionally as well as socially until they're about 5 years of age. And in many populations, orcas remain with their mothers for their entire lives. In captivity, orcas do not live in natural pods, and some have been sent to other facilities for management purposes at age 2 years or even younger. As a result of the unnatural physical and social environment, their lifespans in captivity are significantly shortened, and they often display aberrant and aggressive behavior, which has caused the death of at least of a trainer at SeaWorld. Captive orcas have also injured dozens of trainers, some very seriously. Comparatively, there's not a single record of an orca killing or serious injuring of a human in the wild. For these reasons, I'm introducing the Orca Act, which would end the public display of orcas. Specifically, the legislation prohibits the wild capture, importation, or breeding of orcas for public display. The step we're announcing today follows several years of urging the administration to act on this issue. I've joined with my colleagues to pressure the United States Department of Agriculture to update federal regulations for all captive marine mammals, regulations that are now decades old. On June 11th, 2014, an amendment Representative Huffman and I authored directed the USDA Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service to update those regulations for captive marine mammals. Another supporter of our bill. So last January we authored legislation directing the USDA to update their regulations on captive marine mammals. We are still waiting, however, on action from the department. But even with updated standards, these may not improve, while they may improve the welfare of smaller, more adaptable marine mammals, no amount of regulation can ensure that orcas thrive while in captivity. I want to recognize the actions that have been taken as well at the state level. Assemblyman Richard Bloom has been a leader on this issue, introducing a bill in 2014 to ban the use of orcas for performance purposes in California theme parks and to end captive breeding programs. I look forward to supporting his continuing efforts. And just the other week, the California Coastal Commission also took a bold step in prohibiting further breeding of captive orcas. I applaud this decision, as did many Californians and Americans alike. Public displays of animals can help to educate and kindle an interest and respect for wildlife, but we have a responsibility to look after the welfare of these animals as well. And in this case, the evidence is simply too great that the psychological and physical harm done to these magnificent animals far outweighs any benefits reaped from their display. We cannot be responsible stewards of our natural environment and propagate messages about the importance of animal welfare when our behavior does not reflect those principles. A few years ago, America was captivated by the documentary Blackfish, which raised the question of whether it is cruel and unsafe to keep orcas in captivity. Blackfish put these questions before the public, but it did so building upon a growing scientific consensus among marine mammal experts that keeping these incredible animals in captivity for purposes of display and entertainment is inherently damaging to the animal. The Orca Act ensures that this will be the last generation of orcas who live in captivity, and we will appreciate these incredible creatures where they belong, in the wild. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce one of the great champions, not only here in California, but nationally in the effort to end the captivity of orcas, Assemblymember Richard Bloom.
Thank you, Congressman. And the first thing I want to do is thank Congressman Adam Schiff for introducing this legislation, and also thank everyone else who's taking time to be here today, but to be involved on this very important issue. I represent this area in the California State Assembly. I'm a former mayor of the city of Santa Monica that we're in here today, and also a former California Coastal Commissioner. And in the spring of 2014, I introduced AB 2140, the Orca Welfare and Safety Act in the California State Assembly. And that called for the end to captive breeding and display of orcas in the state of California. While many in the scientific community and trainers who have studied and worked closely with the animals have for years argued that this practice should end, the issue in the public arena was largely unknown and perceived by those making these arguments on the other side as extremists, or SeaWorld would like to have us believe. But then the documentary, as Congressman Schiff mentioned, the documentary Blackfish was viewed by millions across the country and around the world. That was followed by my legislation, and then 17 of the most respected and knowledgeable orca researchers in the world penned a letter of support of our efforts to end orca captivity. The editors at Scientific America and one of the most renowned scientific journals in the world called for the end to orca captivity. And world-renowned animal welfare icons like Jane Goodall, who led the effort many decades ago to save chimpanzees from extinction, and Jean-Michel Cousteau, whose father taught the world about the importance of our oceans and ocean wildlife, also called for the end of orca captivity. So we know now that this is not an issue that is being championed by extremists. This is an issue where the mainstream viewpoint is to end orca captivity. And science has spoken loudly on ending captivity for orcas. As we've heard today, and as we will hear later from expert Naomi Rose, who has been an extraordinary champion on this issues, orcas are simply too socially and ecologically complex to be bred and then kept in swimming pool-sized habitats that are just a fraction, 1/10,000th, in fact, of the space that they need. The science is irrefutable. And just as with climate change, the public is listening. After I introduced my legislation in 2014, more than 1 million people across the country signed online petitions calling for the end of orca captivity. Attendance has plummeted at SeaWorld parks in Florida, Texas, and right here in California. And by SeaWorld's own admission, this attendance has plummeted because of the public's exposure to the debate about orcas not being in captivity. Just a few weeks ago, the California Coastal Commission voted in support of ending captive breeding, and now today we have Adam Schiff, a well-respected member of Congress, introducing the first ever federal legislation calling for the end to orca captivity. Just yesterday, SeaWorld announced plans to reinvest $100 million that was originally set aside to expand their orca attraction to new traditional theme park attractions. I want to say, frankly, this is the right move for SeaWorld, and I stand here willing to assist in further efforts that move the company away from orca captivity that has been the root of their decline. There is no justification for the continued captive display and breeding of orcas for entertainment purposes. They belong in their natural habitat where they can live as families, in pods, for their entire life, where they can travel long distances and feed as predators do. These magnificent creatures are much too large and far too intelligent to be confined in small concrete tanks for their entire lives. It is time to end the practice of keeping orcas captive for human amusement. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce two of the foremost experts on orcas who have a wealth of experience to share with us today. The first, Samantha Berg.
Hi there. Thank you everybody for coming, and thank you especially Representative Schiff and Representative Bloom and also Dr. Naomi Rose for being here. Thank you members of the press for being here at this truly historic moment. I would not describe myself as an orca expert though, but what I do want to share with you is some personal experience that I have of working with these amazing animals in captivity. And because I think that Dr. Naomi Rose will speak to the science, and you've already heard about the science from Representative Schiff and Representative Bloom, but I really want to bring this down to the level of the personal story so that you can hear the perspective shift that's been happening, not just from former trainers and even current trainers and people in the public. So I graduated from college when I was 22 years old with an animal science degree from Cornell University. I was a pre-vet, and I got a little bit sidetracked and decided that I would instead pursue a dream that I had, which was to go work with cetaceans in captivity, specifically dolphins and killer whales. And I think like most people at 22 years old, I thought that SeaWorld was a scientific and a research and an educational institution. So I believed when I left college I would be going to an institution that was doing legitimate science and research and was actually educating the public so that the public would know more about the oceans and know more about the natural history of these animals that we were working with, and I was doing something legitimately good on behalf of these animals. I believed the rhetoric that these animals that were being held in captivity somehow were benefiting their wild populations, and that the educational benefits for the school children that were coming in and for the general public far outweighed the negative side of captivity. But what I want to share, now that I've told you a little bit of my personal story, what I'd like to share with you is some personal stories of the 5 orcas that I worked with. And I think that you will see at the end, when you hear just the stories of these 5 animals, that you'll realize these are representative of all the orcas that are in captivity, and that every single orca suffers horribly in captivity. And you may come to the same conclusion that I did, which is that no amount of education and research justifies what we do to these animals in captivity. So I'll start out with Tilikum, which anyone who's seen the movie Blackfish knows his story. Tilikum's been responsible for the death of 3 people, not just a SeaWorld trainer, but he also killed a trainer in 1991, and he killed a guest who stayed after hours at SeaWorld and ended up in his pool. So that's 3 people. No orca in the wild has ever attacked a human. So, and then we also know Tilikum's story is just terribly tragic. He was taken from his mom when he was a very young animal, and he was relentlessly bullied by the other animals at SeaWorld in the previous facility that he was at. So, and he is still alive, but he's basically living on his own in a tiny pool, again, 1/10,000th of the size that he would live in the wild. But there were other animals that I worked with while I was there. One was Winnie. Winnie came from Windsor Safari Park. I was at SeaWorld in Orlando when she arrived with her trainer. Winnie was also relentlessly bullied by the other animals, the other orcas at Shamu Stadium. She had a very difficult life. Eventually management decided to move her to SeaWorld of Texas. When Winnie died, she had buckets full of coins and pieces of the bottom of the pool and asphalt, everything that had fallen in the pool over the many years that she'd been living there. She'd just been eating it. She was doing these repetitive behaviors because she was so stressed and she was so upset. The other animals that I worked with, Katina, you may have heard of her because she is the mother of the first captive-born killer whale, Kalina, who died tragically at 25 years of age. Katina has been the matriarch at SeaWorld of Orlando for, she was the head there when I was there, and she's still there. But unfortunately, Katina has had seven babies, and she only lives with 2 of them. 2 of the babies have actually deceased. Katina, if you see pictures of her, her entire bottom jaw is completely devastated from chewing on the side of the pools, from fighting with other orcas. So Katina, every day of her life, has to have her teeth flushed out by veterinarians and by trainers, because if any fish gets caught in her teeth, it could actually go septic and kill her. And because of the damage to her teeth, actually, every single one of her teeth that have been filed down, it has to be done without anesthesia. Basically, they drill into these animals' jaws. It causes horrific pain, and they're forced to basically just bear that in order to drill these holes in their teeth so that they can flush them out. And this is every day, she's not just performing in shows every day, but she's basically subject to this tooth flushing procedure every day, and SeaWorld calls that superior dental care. But the two stories that are really most dear to my heart, I think, are two animals. One is named Gudrun and the other is named Taima. Gudrun is Taima's mom. So Gudrun is an Icelandic whale. She died back, I believe, in 96 or 97. The only reason that she was at SeaWorld of Orlando is because SeaWorld was actually prevented from capturing whales off the US coast, so they moved to Iceland to capture whales. So Gudrun is an Icelandic killer whale, and she started out at the Dolphinarium Harderwyk. And then, as an aside, if you'd like to go to Frontline, there's a wonderful story called A Whale of a Business, and it talks about how she ended up at SeaWorld. But she was actually traded from the Dolphinarium Harderwyk through a complicated series of events for some false killer whales at SeaWorld Kamigawa, and she ended up at SeaWorld of Orlando. So Gudrun, unfortunately, had a very straight dorsal fin. Now, you probably know at this point from hearing about the science that all of the male killer whales at SeaWorld have flopped over dorsal fins, but a lot of the female killer whales have flopped over dorsal fins as well. Gudrun, for some reason, happened to have a beautiful straight dorsal fin, and so during one of her pregnancies, until very late in her pregnancy, she was often asked to do photo shoots because she was the most photogenic whale at SeaWorld of Orlando. So while she was very late in her pregnancy, killer whales have a gestation period of about 18 months, and during the last 2 or 3 months of her pregnancy, she was asked daily to slide out in a very shallow area of the pool, putting horrific amounts of pressure on her belly. When she's not pregnant, when an Icelandic killer whale weighs about 5,500 pounds, so it was all her weight on her belly in a very shallow area, many times throughout the day, just because she was a very photogenic whale. And then, unfortunately, the way Gudrun died is her fetus actually expired inside her belly while she was trying to give birth, and that animal had to be forcibly winched out of her uterus, and Gudrun died 4 days later from massive blood loss. Now, if that's not sad enough, her daughter Taima is an even sadder story. Taima is a true hybrid. Her mother is Gudrun, an Icelandic orca, and her father was Kanduk. Kanduk was a transient orca, and these are two populations of orca that would have never met in the wild. So Taima was a true hybrid, and Taima had some personality problems over the years, and she was difficult to work with. A lot of her trainers reported issues with her, and eventually she was banned from water work, and she had less interactions with her trainers. For a while, SeaWorld decided that she needed to be put on birth control so that she wouldn't have any more babies, but eventually they came around and decided that she should have another baby, and she was inseminated with Tillicum sperm. And Taima died exactly the way her mother died. Her fetus died inside of her during birth, and the fetus had to be forcibly removed from her, and literally her uterus was outside of her body when she died. So those are 5 animals that I worked with that I know the personal stories of. And when I think about these individual stories, and I realize it's representative of every single orca in captivity. There isn't one orca, even if they're alive right now in captivity, that lives a happy, idyllic life, and they all live tragic lives. They all have tragic stories. So what I realized personally is that as much as it was my dream to swim with a killer whale, it's obviously not the killer whale's dream to swim with us. And I think that we have realized all of the science stands behind it, but also all of the personal stories that I just shared with you show you that these animals do not belong in captivity. They don't thrive, and we cannot meet their needs in captivity, and it's time to change the law. Thank you very much.
Sam, thank you very much, and very, very powerful. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Naomi Rose. Doctor?
Thank you all for coming. As Sam said, I'm really grateful for your attendance at this historic event. For me, it truly is historic. I've been working on this issue as an advocate and as a scientist since 1993. And I started straight out of graduate school after I finished my PhD on the social dynamics of orcas in the wild. And I started without a very strong position on this issue, even though I'd started feeling very uncomfortable about seeing these animals in small tanks and then working with them out in the wild, where they are free to live in family groups and travel 100 miles in a day and forage as nature intended them to. But I got the job at then the Humane Society of the United States. I now work for the Animal Welfare Institute, and I was asked to start this campaign to end the captivity of large whales, killer whales, beluga whales, false killer whales, pilot whales in captivity. And 22 years later, Congressman Schiff has introduced the Orca Act, and to call that the culmination of my career is really no exaggeration. This is what I have been working for 22 years. And I'm in this for the long game. This isn't going to happen overnight. It hasn't happened overnight for sure, but it's not going to happen overnight even now that there's a bill. We are going to continue to work directly with the Congressman, with Assemblyman Bloom, with the California Coastal Commission, with Florida authorities, with Texas authorities, with the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service of the USDA. This is a multifaceted campaign at the policy level, and I've been involved in all of these aspects for over 2 decades. And I am going to continue to work on this until we actually achieve the end goal, which is to end the public display of these unsuitable species in concrete tanks. Our long-term goal is to retire these animals to sea pen sanctuaries, and I'm working on that with a number of science colleagues to effectuate that, but that is also something for the future. We have no sanctuaries right now anywhere in the world for these animals if they are ever retired from performance. We need to create such sanctuaries. Until then, it's absolutely imperative that SeaWorld and the other dolphinariums and the other facilities that hold these animals become part of the solution instead of stubbornly sticking to being part of the problem. And I really encourage them and the new CEO, Mr. Joel Manby, to start a dialogue with both the NGO community, the animal community, and also the legislators who are concerned about this. This is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be an adversarial process. It can be a win-win solution. I've always argued for the win-win solution. I want SeaWorld to thrive, but they cannot as long as orcas are on display, because orcas do not thrive in captivity. So this is just the start of what may be a long process, but I've been around for a long time and I have the patience to see this through to the end. And so we are going to see a future sooner than later now, thanks to Congressman Schiff, where orcas are no longer held in concrete tanks. Thank you very much.
I have a quick clarification. Sure. We'll be happy to entertain some questions, and Richard, did you have something you want to clarify?
Yeah, I just want to clarify one thing I said. I used the number $100 million that SeaWorld was committing to purpose other than orca captivity at SeaWorld here in San Diego. It's actually $1 million of the $50 million according to news reports yesterday, so just that clarification.
Is there a strong support for this bill, and if it does pass, can it be retroactive so that the current orcas now in captivity be released?
I think there is strong support for the legislation in Congress. The big question, though, is, at least in the House of Representatives, what will the Speaker and the new leadership of the House think of this legislation? I don't want to give anyone the impression this is going to be an easy undertaking. I don't think it will be. But nonetheless, I think you can see the trend from the federal legislation, state legislation, coastal commission, as well as the impact, frankly, of people voting with their feet who are not attending SeaWorld because of this issue, that the days of orcas in captivity are coming to an end. And we think that the introduction of this legislation and our efforts to move it in Congress, as well as Assemblymember Bloom's efforts in the state legislature, and all of the grassroots advocacy around the country, are ultimately going to mean the end of orcas in captivity. Yeah.
In response to your question about whether all the orcas can be released, no. In fact, probably at the moment, none of them are good candidates for release back into the wild. Most of them were born in captivity. Only a handful were caught from the wild many, many, many years ago. And so what we are advocating is a retirement to sanctuaries. Almost every large zoo species has sanctuaries when they get retired from display or performance if they're in circuses. Elephants have sanctuaries, tigers have sanctuaries, bears have sanctuaries, chimpanzees have sanctuaries. And for some reason there's no sanctuaries for retired cetaceans, and that is what we are proposing. And again, SeaWorld has to be part of the solution. They're the ones with the expertise at keeping these animals alive when they're confined in small spaces. A sea pen will still be much smaller than their natural habitat, so they are going to still need human care and they're going to still be stressed. But my belief is that in a sea pen sanctuary they will be far less stressed than in a concrete swimming pool.
Other questions?
Does this have larger ramifications for other zoo animals that are held in captivity? I mean, how far does this go? Do we stop at orcas? Do we move on to other animals?
Well, I'll give you my thoughts, and then I'll pass it on to my colleague, Assemblyman Bloom. You know, I think a lot of this is going to be driven by the scientific evidence. The more we learn about animals, the more we learn about their intelligence, about their emotive capabilities, and about the impact of captivity on different species. I think that will guide both what the Congress and the legislature, as well as society, want to see in terms of the exhibition of animals. But let me invite my colleague if he'd like to share some thoughts.
I agree completely with Congressman Schiff. We follow, as legislators, we follow the science and where the science leads us. And the science is incontrovertible when it comes to cetaceans, when it comes to orca killer whales. And that's why we're so active on this particular issue, because study after study, scientist after scientist, the large body of scientific evidence says that orcas are not faring well in captivity, and that's why it has to end.
Fair statement or unfair statement? If this passes, SeaWorld just goes out of business. They can't exist without this.
Well, you know, I'll invite Sam or Naomi also address this. My feeling is the answer is no. It may mean that SeaWorld has to change its model and it has to update its attractions, but the goal is not to drive SeaWorld out of business. The goal is to end the captivity of orcas, and it will be incumbent on the management of SeaWorld to decide how best to manage the park when the captivity of orcas comes to an end. But Sam, do you want to?
Yeah, I think the only people claiming that right now is actually SeaWorld, in my experience anyway. I think that there are so many creative, innovative ways for them to make money. Just think about CGI. Just think about, you know, just access to information on the internet. Think about, there's so many ways for people to learn things about these animals that it's not necessary anymore to see them in a circus environment. But I certainly believe that SeaWorld, they've been around for 60 years, they can figure out a way even to monetize sea pens if they wanted to. They could have people pay to come and feed the animals or help the vets take care of them. I guarantee they would get paying customers. If they built the sea pens, people would come. So I don't think that this is the end of their business, it's the end of maybe this business model, but they can create a new one. And as we've all said up here, we're all willing to work with them, and we love to help them and give them suggestions. None of us want to see SeaWorld go out of business because honestly, they have the expertise. They have the veterinarians. They do good work with rehab, with manatees, with sea turtles, and they do have the veterinary expertise to help even with on the very slim occasion that it happens, killer whales do get stranded, so it's nice to have the people available and the facilities to rehab the animals. But we just don't think that the circus environment is necessary for these animals anymore.
There's no question but that SeaWorld can and should change its model of doing business. They've been advised, there have been media reports about their having been advised by financial experts that they should change their business model, and I think frankly, as I said, it's a positive indication that they've decided to take $1 million that was going to be allocated to the larger pen that they want to build, the larger swimming pool that they want to build. They're reallocating that money to a new attraction at SeaWorld in San Diego. That's the business model that they need to follow. Amusement parks around the country are doing record business right now. SeaWorld is the one anomaly where business is down. So they can come back. They need to join their colleagues in the rest of the world of these entertainment parks and eliminate these aquatic displays and move towards other types of entertainment.
We have a last question. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Well done. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Totally fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you. But I wanted to say something different because everybody's covering the science, so to bring it down to the level of the individuals of what they're actually
Good. You bring a different perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's why. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, because I think that needs to be in there, because I think everybody starts hearing the numbers and the facts and it sort of goes over your head. But when you think about like literally the suffering on the level of the individual, that's why they don't belong.